So last session, it was like a glimpse really of how epic this story was. I think we all experienced together this incredible epic story. We could experience a little bit how Muhammad escaped from Mecca to Medina in the middle of the night. We experienced the birth and the death of a big Muslim hero, Abdullah ibn Zubair. We experienced the heroic feasts of, a big Sahabi woman, Asma bint Abi Bakr. We traveled with the Muslims to Medina, where we saw them how they settled in the middle of the hardship. We saw together how they had to overcome the difficulties of being resourceless when they started. And we saw how they built that first mosque and they made that first call to prayer, that first call that is still echoing to the world today, calling for a different world, calling for a better world, yearning for something better in their own lives. And we're still hearing that call today. And that yearning, long before that yearning that was called really out loud in Medina, this yearning was a call inside the heart of a baby boy in Mecca. So let's travel back now to Mecca. Muhammad is now 6 years old. He is with his mother, Amina. Together, they are living together, and at 6 years old, she decides to take him on a journey that will mark his life forever. She wanted to take him to Medina on a trip together. Why Medina? Why his mother wanted to take him to Medina at 6 years old? Well, first, because Muhammad's grandfather, the most famous Abdul Muttalib, his mom was a Medina lady. So Muhammad basically had an extended family in Medina that she wanted him to meet. But there was another reason, more important reason she wanted to take him there, is because his father was buried in Medina. How did this happen? How could his father be buried there? Well, when Abdullah married Amina, his mom, at a very young age, she was almost like not yet 20, he was maybe in his early 20s when they got married. As soon as they got married, a few weeks later, Abdullah, the father of Muhammad, he went on a trip for trading in Syria. On his way back from Syria, of course, at that time, Amina became pregnant, and Abdullah, the father of Muhammad, didn't even know that his wife was pregnant. While he was coming back from Syria, he decided to stop in Medina for a while to visit his extended family. And while he was there, Abdullah fell sick and he died out of nowhere in his early 20s, and they buried him in Medina. Muhammad was born fatherless. He didn't have a father. Straight away, he didn't even meet his father, not one day. And as soon as he was born, soon after he was born, he didn't grow up with his mother directly. He was taken to the desert to breastfeed with a Bedouin lady. That was a strange custom that Quraysh had. They wanted their kids, the Meccan kids who come from noble families, and let's remember, Muhammad comes from a noble family of Quraysh. He was, at the end of the day, the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. So they wanted him to go and grow in the desert. So all these babies that come from these noble families, they usually give them to Bedouin women who just had babies, so they are breastfeeding already. They will adopt a Meccan boy. They will take him to the desert so that in the first 2 or 3 years of the life of that child, they grow up in the middle of the desert. They believe that they grow up stronger. They grow up also learning the customs of the desert. They grow up learning the customs of hardship. So they grow up more strong. At the same time, they have the best language, because the Bedouin language was the pure Arabic language, where Mecca was a polluted city with visitors and pilgrims and peoples and streets. So the first few years, all these families, they send their babies out. So Muhammad was sent out to the desert in the first 3 years of his life, 2 to 3 years. And he was taken by a lady called Halima as-Sa'diyah from the Bani Sa'd. Probably they are related to my family in Bani Sa'd. He was taken there, and that's where he grew up. He grew up for a few years, and then he, with his foster mother, with his foster brothers, running around in the wild, really living without, just imagine the desert place where there's really nothing. It's just a tent. There's no homes. There's no nothing. There's no pilgrims. There was just the most simple life ever. That was his life in the first 2 to 3 years. And then he was taken back to Mecca when he united with his mom finally, and he lived with her 2 to 3 years in Mecca, just the childhood years. And now she's taking him to Medina to meet his family. They went to Medina, only 3 persons. Amina, his mom, and their servant, Ayman, young lady at that time, and Muhammad. 3 of them. They went to Medina, and they would stay there for almost a month in Medina, where Muhammad will be visiting his extended families, and he will play with his cousins from his extended families, and he will have fond memories. Later on, when he was in Medina, he would remember that pond of water when he swam when he was a kid, you know, bare skin in the middle of the sun. That was a new experience to him, because in Mecca they didn't have that. In the desert, he didn't have that. So he remembered that. But there was also an emotional part of that journey, because she also took him to visit his father's grave. Now imagine Muhammad, a boy of 6 years old, visiting like a piece of land, a grave with a stone, telling him like, this is your father. And Amina will be sitting there and crying on her husband, and Muhammad will be witnessing that. In an age and a time that glorifies lineage and glorifies fatherhood and glorifies all that support that comes from the fathers, he had to experience that. But that would pale in front of the emotion that he will feel just a little bit later. That would fail. This experience with his father will pale to what's coming next. After they finish this visit in Medina, they are now going back to Mecca, the 3 of them. And on their way, almost in the middle, around in a place called Al-Abwa, suddenly his mother will fall sick in the middle of the desert. And they were only the 3 of them, him, the servant lady, and Amina. And he would see his mom fading in front of his eyes. He couldn't do anything, a 6-year boy child. There was no medicine, there was no doctors, there was no healthcare, there was no nothing. Even the food was limited, water was limited. He couldn't do anything. Imagine how powerless he must have felt to experience that. And soon enough, Amina, his mother, will die in front of his eyes. And while he died, he can't even just watch or be taken care of. Him and Ayman have to bury her, and Ayman asked him to help to dig the grave for his own mom. So at 6 years, a boy devastated by the loss of his mom, he's now digging the grave of his mother, and they will bury her there. His servant Ayman would say she would try to hide his eyes so that he doesn't see his mother in the grave, so that he's not touched by it. But of course, it was what it was, and he had to experience all of that. And then he left his mother. Just after seeing his father's grave, he now left his mother in the middle of the way, and now he's alone. Only with Ayman, that lady, traveling back from Medina to Mecca. Fatherless, motherless, going to a new city to start a new life. Imagine that experience, going many days in the camel to arrive there. When they arrived to to Mecca, Ayman, she didn't even go to her home. She directly took that boy, she took him to his grandfather. Abdul Muttalib opened the door. He saw only Muhammad and Ayman, and he asked, "Where is your mother?" And Muhammad starts sobbing and he cried, and he said she died. And Abdul Muttalib will hug him and he will tell him, "Anta bunayya, you are my son." And he will hug him and he will take him to his own home. It's hard to comprehend or to even imagine what this experience could have been for those of us who are fortunate enough to not go through this. But one can only imagine the level of trauma, but also the powerlessness and the smallness towards something in life that you truly cannot choose. That there's something much bigger than you that is guiding things. Maybe one indication about the level of what he might have felt would come to us 50 years later. 50 years later, when Muhammad was now a prophet, he was a leader of a community. He had, his name was everywhere. That was after the Hijrah. In one of those days when he was in his 50s, Muhammad will be with his companions somewhere around Medina, between Medina and Mecca. not far from Al-Abwa, where his mother was buried. He will ask his companion permission to go somewhere. The companions didn't know where, but of course they followed him. He's the prophet of God. So now they all followed him, and he went there and he would search, and he will find his Muhammad will follow with, he will go and find this grave. All his companions didn't even know where he was going. He was already a big prophet and a leader. And once they arrived there, Muhammad will sit down in front of the grave of his mother, and he will start to sob and cry and cry and cry. Cry so much so that they say his beard, the black beard that he had, became so wet from his own tears. And the Sahaba who was all around him didn't even know why he was crying. But just watching him cry, they all started to cry with him. And they thought that maybe he got some news from God, that there's something bad that's going to go on with the Muslim community. They had no idea, but all they could imagine, all they could experience is to cry with him. You know, that was that moment where even when he was a prophet of God, even when he was a leader of a community, even if he was already married to many women at that time, even when he has fought wars and has become a big leader, still inside of him we could see that wounded boy in that moment when he visited his mother's grave and he had to cry for that. And then he told his companions, oh, that was my mother's grave. I was given permission to visit her grave. And then he went back. Now back to Mecca, when now Muhammad is 6 years old. Now he's living in Abdul Muttalib's home. He's growing up. Abdul Muttalib is a big leader. He's like the chieftain of the Bani Hashim. And he's almost 90 years old. He had 10 sons and so many grandkids. Of course, he loved Muhammad, but he was already an old man with so many other kids around. But Muhammad will now grow in that household. It was a special household because now he was growing in the house of a leader. Abdul Muttalib, he had they would go and build him like a small place near the Kaaba where he would go and sit down, and all the dignitaries, all the leaders will come and they will talk together. And Muhammad will sit next to his grandfather and he will listen to those stories. He would experience, he would see with his own eyes what it is to be a noble man where people will come and seek counsel from. So he lived that, and he became very friends with his uncles because some of his uncles were actually his own age. Hamza, especially Hamza. Hamza was almost the age of Muhammad. They grew up together in that house of Abdul Muttalib, and we will see later the role of Hamza in defending Islam. But also his cousin woman, Safiya, she was 2 years younger than him. He also became very, very close to Safiya. And if you know who Safiya was, Safiya later on, she would marry a man called Az-Zubair. And Az-Zubair, his son, will then marry Asma bint Abu Bakr, if you remember her from last session. And they are the father of Abdullah ibn Zubair. So Safiya, this lady, that little lady, who was his auntie, but his own age, she would then become the grandmother of Abdullah ibn Zubair, the one that we saw last time, and the mother of Zubair. But anyway, now he's growing up with those kids. And just as this life is starting in the house of Abdul Muttalib, it didn't really last that long, because now Abdul Muttalib would die at age 8, when Muhammad was 8 years old. And that would be the third time where Muhammad is already orphaned. And he had to leave the house of Abdul Muttalib. So they gave him to Abu Talib. Abu Talib, his uncle. Why from all the uncles, 10 of them, they chose Abu Talib to take care of Muhammad? Because Abu Talib and Abdullah, they come from the same mother. They are full brothers. While all the other uncles, they come from different mothers. So they were very close in a way. And finally, Muhammad, at age 8, finally he had a home. Because he would stay in that home, at Abu Talib's home, from 8 until 25 when he would marry Khadija. So really the most stable period of his life before Khadija's marriage and what comes afterwards was really that home of Abu Talib. This is why to him, Abu Talib is like a father. That's why also for him, Abu Talib became the one who would mostly protect him later on when he starts preaching Islam, even though Abu Talib never became a Muslim himself. That's also where he became friends with his other cousins that were growing with him in his home, the sons of Abu Talib. Most especially of them, he was really fond of Ja'far. Ja'far was his favorite, and they became very friends in that home. And also we will see the role of Ja'far later in Islam. Now Abu Talib become the leader of the Bani Hashim, but Abu Talib had many kids, had more than 10 kids, and he was a poor man. He wasn't rich. Unlike other chieftains from other tribes, Abu Talib had a very humble life. So it was a life of still humility and struggle comparatively to also his own lineage as a Quraishi. And we know that in that home, when they will bring food, in the Sirah, they will talk about how all the kids of Abu Talib, they will run to snatch the food when there was be food at home. But Muhammad, out of pride, and maybe because he feels like out of a feeling of a burden, he would now stay away. And so much so that Abu Talib, his uncle, and the wife of Abu Talib, Fatima, will keep like a food for him on the side so that they can give him later, because they know that Muhammad, he will not go and fight for himself to eat because he was probably feeling ashamed or bad. That's how he grew up. And Fatima, the wife of Abu Talib, he became fond of her as well, because now she became his mom at that time, from that age of 8 until 25. And later on, we will see how Fatima, she will become a Muslim also later. That was in that home. Now, when he became 8 years old, he felt like he needed to start working, to start to get some livelihood. Maybe he felt bad that he was a burden on his uncle. So he asked to work, but there was nothing that he could do really. He wasn't skilled that much, so he became a shepherd. From age 8 to almost age 15, he would work as a shepherd for some little coins. They say, for qararit in Arabic, just for little coins here and there. Of course, that was a lowly job for a Qurashi like him, because all the other boys of the Quraysh, the big families, they will probably not have to do that kind of work. But later on in his life, he will talk fondly also about the shepherd, and he would say, there was not one prophet who was not a shepherd at some point in their life. And he would say that shepherd teaches the shepherd so many characters. Because a shepherd first, he had to care for his sheep. He also had to guide his sheep to go and eat and come back. The shepherd also has to be patient to be able to stay with their sheep all the time. The shepherd also has to know how to unite the sheep together rather than going in different directions, but also how to protect them. So in a way, a lot of character traits that a good shepherd has, or a shepherd would learn, Muhammad will later speak of, and it's true that so many prophets in the Bible and the other lineages have started that way. So that was Muhammad's life now from 8 to 15 as a shepherd. When he became 15 years old, he was ready for more. So he went to his uncle Abu Talib and he asked to take bigger responsibilities and to work in the trade. The trade, Mecca at that time had many trades between Yemen, Mecca, and Syria. And now Muhammad took a small jobs as a camel boy, not even a merchant. He didn't have the capital or the money to become a merchant, but he was able to become a camel boy. Camel boy means it's like an assistant caravan boy. He would go with them, he would like take care of the camels. When they will rest at night, he will take out the luggage, he will feed the camels, he will bring water, he will serve the merchants. That was how he started, from a very humble beginning. But of course, that experience was also very important, because at least he was now going out of Mecca. Now he is going to Yemen, he is meeting different tribes, he's meeting different people, he's seeing traders negotiate. He's also seeing people from other religions. He's mingling with people from the Persian empires, people from the Christian empire of Byzantium. So it was a great experience, even though it was still a very lowly experience. And now our young man, now he's like at the end of his, at the end of his teens, in the early 20s, our young man is building himself in this low job, trying to find a place in his life. And if, like every young man will happen to him, he would fall in love. And he would fall in love with who? with his cousin Atika bint Abu Talib, the daughter of Abu Talib, the daughter of Abu Talib with whom he actually grew up in the same house. So she was 2 or 3 years younger than him, and they had an affection. He had a crush on her. And he gathered all his courage and he went to his uncle in his early 20s to ask for her hand. And he went to Abu Talib and he proposed, not proposed, he asked the hand of his daughter. But then Abu Talib declined him because he had promised Atika, the daughter, to another man from a different tribe, a man who was obviously more established, more rich, more stable, who had a fixed livelihood already. And Muhammad was heartbroken. And there are few things in life that can hurt a man more than seeing the woman that he loves go with another man. So imagine his feeling. Not only he is denied that woman that he loved, he's gonna also have to see her go with another man, and he's of course powerless. He went further to Abu Talib. Why are you denying me your daughter? Because he knew he had the potential, and Abu Talib loved him, but still he denied him his daughter. And Abu Talib politely told him, oh, this other tribe, they had married us their woman before, and we have to be generous and return the generosity back. So in a way, he found a polite answer. But the true answer was that Muhammad was not yet ready, was not yet strong enough and probably Abu Talib wanted a better future or a more stable future, and he wanted to marry this woman to this other man. So it was heartbreaking for Muhammad at that time that despite everything that he was trying, he was still really not enough. He was still not even in a position to create a family of his own and to establish himself. Now that woman, she will marry that other man and she will have other kids with that other man. Her name will become Hani. And Muhammad and Hani remained in touch throughout their lives. And Hani, that lady, in a way, she was not just the cousin of Muhammad from the Abu Talib, she was also like a sister because she's growing with her in the same house. Plus, she was also the crush of his teenage or of his early manhood. So they stayed in touch. And later on, when Khadija would die, when Abu Talib will die, when life became really tough on him after the Ta'if and before the Hijrah, in the late days of Mecca, he used to go and visit her more frequently in her home, probably, to discuss, to have comfort. And interestingly, one of the most famous events of the Muslim calendar, the Isra and Mi'raj, the travel to heaven that Muhammad did, actually it happened from her own home, from the Hani home. That was the days when Muhammad came back broken from Ta'if, and he stayed at the house of Hani. And they prayed together the Isha, and Muhammad went to sleep. And that was the night when Muhammad will get this dream of ascending to heaven through Jerusalem and come back. And when he would wake up in the morning, he would tell Hani that story. And Hani will tell him, don't tell anybody. They will laugh on you. They will ridicule you. Just keep it for yourself. Don't tell people. But of course, Muhammad will go and will tell people about that story. So that was Hani. But then, of course, Muhammad will do the Hijrah. Hani will stay in Mecca. Even though you can tell already she wasn't a Muslim publicly, but the fact that they stayed friends and that he could visit her, definitely she was a sympathizer. But her husband wasn't, and her kids wasn't, so she wasn't a Muslim publicly. Muhammad now immigrated to Medina, of course, and she stayed in Mecca. But another interesting story we know about her is when he came back later on, that's talking 10 years after the Hijrah, when Muhammad conquered Mecca back. The first time he entered Mecca after the conquest, he didn't have a home because the wife of Khadija was already gone. The house of the other houses of Abu Talib were already gone. So when he conquered Mecca later on and he needed a place to rest, to do wudu, to pray, that would be the house of Hani, that same lady that was living with him before in Abu Talib's home. And at that moment, Hani there was a story where there was Hani protected two of the disbelievers from the Quraysh that the Muslims were searching for. So Ali was looking for two men who are from the Quraysh that the Muslims have trouble with, and they were looking for them, but Hani wanted these two men to be protected. And Ali was searching for them, and he found them at the house of Hani. Hani, by the way, is his sister, because she's the daughter of Abu Talib, just like Ali is. So when Ali stormed into her house, he saw these two men. He wanted to settle his dispute, the Muslim dispute with them. Hani stopped him. Don't touch them. They are under my protection. And Ali was angry. How can you protect them? They are disbelievers. They have harmed Islam. They have harmed the Muslim. But Hani insisted, don't touch them. And then Hani went to his wife, Fatima, to complain. She went to wives of Ali. She said, tell your husband not to touch these men because they are under my protection. But Fatima sided with her husband, Ali. She said, how could you, why should you, you shouldn't actually protect these disbelievers. Ali is right. So this Hani was also upset. She went to Muhammad now after the conquest, and he told him, Muhammad, can you stop the son of my dad? She called him the son of my dad, Ali, because she was upset with him. She didn't call him my brother. Can you stop the son of my dad? And Muhammad said, what's wrong? What's going on? And Hani then will tell him, he wants to settle his dispute with these two men, but I'm protecting them. And then Muhammad will answer, who you protect, we protect. Man ajarti, nahnu na'jur. Yani who you protect. And this will later become something in the fiqh of Islam, of the big schools of fiqh of the Muslim, that a woman Muslim can have the same right of granting protection to outsiders just like a man. From that incident of Hani granting protection to those disbelievers and Muhammad endorsing her. And also on that days, after the conquest of Mecca, we're talking now, in that same period, Hani became Muslim. She embraced Islam publicly, because all of Mecca anyway embraced Islam publicly at that moment. And her husband, he didn't, and he ran away. So, and which made their marriage de facto not valid anymore, because she was a Muslim woman and he was a mushrik, he was a non-believer, so their marriage was nullified. And now Hani became divorced. And now you have this moment, which is almost 40 years now after that initial crush that they had at the very beginning. When Hani became divorced, Muhammad will offer her at that time marriage again. But Hani, he will offer her marriage, but Hani, she will politely decline by saying that she has to take care of her kids. She already had 7 kids of her own at that time, and it was really very complicated for her to do. And she would tell Muhammad, Muhammad, I loved you in Jahiliyyah, and what about now in Islam, and you are the Prophet of God and I'm a Muslim, I love you even more. But it's not the time right now. She was already much older, and at the same time she had the kids, and she told him, if I'm afraid that I cannot combine my responsibilities to you, but also to the kids. But also because it's so logistically difficult. At the end of the day, even though there was this affection, Muhammad was now a huge leader. He didn't have time for much, and he had to go back to Medina. She was settled in Mecca. She had a nice big house in Mecca with all her kids. We've seen the house of Muhammad in Medina. If you've seen this photo on Facebook, he has a couple of small rooms next to the big mosque where he had his own houses with his wives. So of course, she wouldn't go to live by herself, and her kids are in Mecca. It's complicated. So of course she declined, and Muhammad will then reply very gracefully by saying, oh, you the woman of Mecca, you are the best in terms of doing your duty to your father, to your husbands, the best in riding the camels, and the best in raising kids. And that was the story of Hani, that lady of, and it's really interesting to see that even after 40 years, when Muhammad became that big prophet, these kind of small things that come from childhood or from teenage, these affection that grow in these moments, were still alive in the hearts of men. And now that was long now to go in Mecca. But now let's go back. We're back to Mecca now, when Muhammad has just proposed. Of course, now he doesn't know all of that story. When Muhammad has just proposed and he got his heart broken, he's now in his early 20s, a man trying to find his way in his life. And something will happen in Mecca that will also mark his life forever. It will, a lot. What happened that stays with him for so long? A Yemeni trader, when he was in Mecca, a Yemeni trader came from Yemen to trade in Mecca. Like it was the pilgrim season. So that trader, he sold items to a very rich chieftain of Mecca, one of the big leaders. It's called Al-As ibn Wa'il, which for those who love history is the father of Amr ibn al-As, who would later become a very famous figure. But now, that Yemeni trader, he would sell products to that chieftain, and he needed the money back. So the chieftain of Quraysh told him, okay, I will pay you in a couple of days after the Hajj. All right. So that Yemeni guy, he went, he did the Hajj, he did his thing. He came back to Amr, to Al-As. He asked for his payment, and he turned him away. He said, no, okay, come after tomorrow. He came later, he said, oh, come tomorrow. He came later, and he said, oh, come later. He was basically just evading him and running away because he didn't want to pay. And at some point, he faced him and he said, I'm not going to pay you. And that Yemeni trader was so wronged. How could you do that to me? But it was tribal society. That Yemeni trader had nobody, had nothing. Had that Yemeni trader, his tribe was already very far. This guy from Quraysh was very powerful, and basically he cannot overturn this judgment. So he was outraged, and he went to the other leaders of Quraysh to complain. So he went to some leaders and said, look what Al-As has done to me. He's wronged me. He didn't pay me. And when they know, like, oh, this is a weak Yemeni guy alone, and this other one is the chieftain of Quraysh. So of course, they said, they scolded him. They said, oh, sorry, so that's not our business. We can't interfere. And of course, they had a problem to go and face that powerful man. So then that Yemeni trader, he will do something. He was so outraged. He went to the Kaaba, and he made like a very strong poem to criticize Mecca. The poem was, oh man, how could you do this to a foreign trader? Where are the men in this city? Are you holy because of that stone that you have, the Kaaba, or are you holy because of your men? And basically his poem was very, very emotional and destroyed the reputation of Mecca by saying, I am a pilgrim coming to your land, and I am being wronged. And at the end of the day, there is no sanctity with people who are corrupt and exploitative. I will share later the poem in Arabic. It's a beautiful poem in Arabic, but basically the sentence is, how could you do that? If you think you are sacred because you are the custodian of the Kaaba, then know that you are not, because sanctity is when you are honoring the rights of the unjust. And when this happened, it spread everywhere in Mecca about that trader who is really complaining. And of course, Mecca felt bad. So some of the leaders of Mecca, they realized that this is really wrong. And they did something that they've never done before. They gathered all together in one of their houses, and the uncles of Muhammad, all of them, will join. And they will create something they called a pact. That was a revolutionary pact at that time, that Muhammad will be so grateful that he had joined. A revolutionary pact where they all agreed together that they will support anybody, if the weak, that has been treated unjustly or unfairly, regardless of their tribal affiliation. And basically, those people of Mecca, those leaders of Mecca, they agreed to come together to protect this Yemeni guy against this chieftain of Quraysh that was one of them. It was really the birth of a concept that transcends tribalism. And now all these guys, they went to the As ibn Wa'il, they forced him to pay his due to the Yemeni guy, and they had this Hilf al-Fudul. In Arabic, it's called Hilf al-Fudul. a pact among people, among the leaders, among some of the leaders of Quraysh, including all the uncles of Muhammad, to protect the poor, to protect those who are treated unjustly, regardless of their affiliation. And Muhammad will be part of that pact. And he will be so excited about it. And he will sign it, and he will be part of it. Later on, and we know that Muhammad rejected so many things from Jahiliyyah. Later on in Islam, Muhammad will say, oh, I was invited to that pact of Jahiliyyah. And if I am invited to it today, in Islam, I would still agree. And how could he not? Because that pact, in a way, is the heart of what later become the Muslim message, which is really a message that people should stand together and support each other based on the rights, not based on the tribal, based on what is just, based on what is fair. And that's what Muhammad later on would teach his community, that the Muslim, they should support and protect each other, and there is no differences, there is no social differences, there is no tribal differences. So now we know why it was such an important milestone for his youth to be part of that pact. And now we see him also, how when he became a prophet, how he taught all those principles later on to his community. But you know, yes, he was a big prophet, alive in his time, but we can always see his childhood all the time, you know, coming back to him in many, many moments of his life. Now, when he was already in Medina, guess who will follow him? You remember Fatima, the wife of Abu Talib, his mother. She would now, when Abu Talib dies, she would leave Mecca and she would travel to Medina to join Muhammad and to go into, she became a Muslim and to join Muhammad. So Fatima, he loved her so much that he called his own daughter Fatima. So Muhammad's daughter is called Fatima. So that his mother now, she came to Medina, they were living together. In the 4th year of Hijrah, that lady, the one who raised him from age 8 to 25, will die. And you have, in her funeral, Muhammad will be standing in her funeral. He clothed her in his own clothes, and he will take so many dua and blessing, and all the Sahaba were around him. And there was a moment when they put her body in the grave, Muhammad will go inside the grave and he will lie next to her, and he would pray and pray and pray and touching the walls of the grave to bless that place before she was covered. And all the Sahaba was watching him, and then he went out, he was crying, and then they would bury Fatima. And Umar ibn al-Khattab saw that, and he said, Muhammad, why did you do that? You've never done it to any other person. And he said, oh Umar, this is my mom after my mom. She was the one who cared for me and nurtured me in those years. And she was the one that will go and will hide food to me when my cousins will be eating the food so that I can get something. And that was his love for his other mom, Fatima. Remember that lady, Ayman, that was the servant lady who was with him when his mother died in Al-Abwa, when she was with him in Medina, the one who took him back to Abdul Muttalib. Of course, Ayman, she still, you know, she was still with Muhammad all her life. She became a Muslim, and she will still with him. She will fly. She will go with him as well in Medina, and she will marry. Muhammad will give her to marriage to a man. She will get the first baby born, Ayman, and then another one. Ayman will live with him, serving him all his life at the same time. But also she was a care figure for him, and she also traveled with him to Medina. Ayman was known in the battles of Uhud, when she will go and be behind the armies when the Muslims were fighting, and when the Muslims were wounded in the battle, she would be like the nurse, the volunteer nurse that she will go and take care of the wounds of the soldiers. Ayman would go with him also to another war in Khaybar. Imagine that the woman that saw him when he was just tiny, when he was still losing his mom, she stayed with him all his life. And her first husband of Ayman, he died with Muhammad in Khaybar in the first battle. Her second husband, Zayd, will die with Muhammad in the Ma'rakat Tubuk, in another battle. And then one day at the end of his life, she was with him in Hunain, and his first son, Ayman, will also die in Hunain. It's really, to comprehend the level of what took place in those years is unbelievable. She stayed with him all her life. She dedicated all her life to Islam. She lost this, and for her, she was blessed, and she was absolutely blessed to be living that experience. She lost her first husband. The second and the third, they all died in war. But the fourth one, Usama ibn Zayd, he became a huge Muslim hero later on, and he became the first boy, the first army commander that will attack the Byzantine Empire. That was his second son, Usama, who would survive, who was so beloved by the Prophet. So that servant lady, a slave girl at that time, who would serve Muhammad, who would have said that this slave lady in the desert, her son will one day become the commander of the Muslim armies that will attack the Byzantine Empire of that time. And that's a true story. Of course, the full story is she lost also her other son to the war. And her last son, Usama, became this huge hero. When Muhammad dies, she was still alive, and she will cry him, and with Umar and Abu Bakr, they will all visit her and honor her until the end of her life. That was the story of Ayman. And that's how Muhammad make it through. And at the end of his days, when after the conquest of Mecca, Muhammad was now a huge, big prophet. All of Arabia was coming to him. All the dignitaries were coming to visit him. That was after he conquered Mecca. He's sitting with the Sahaba. All the tribal chiefs are coming to visit him, to play allegiances, to talk to him, to make alliances with him. As with this happening, an old, weak lady came. She's asking to see him, a Bedouin lady. All the Sahaba were, who are you? Why you want to see the Prophet? She's like, tell him I'm Halima Sa'diyah. And when Muhammad heard, that was his foster mother from the desert. She was still alive. She was a weak and sick woman at that time, a Bedouin. She came to see him after he had prevailed at the end of his life. And when Muhammad heard that, he stopped his meeting and he cried, Ummi, Ummi. And he welcomed her. He took out his clock. He put his clock on the floor. He asked her to sit down. And he asked the Sahaba to leave them alone for a moment. That was maybe 2 or 3 years before Muhammad died. So it was already the end of his life. So now imagine that moment when Muhammad, just at the end of his mission almost, sitting and looking at the eyes of that old lady who was his foster mother in the desert 60 years earlier. And they're looking at the eyes, and what could have they shared? What could have crossed his mind? He had come really far. He had come really far. And we could see the touch, the humanity, that the childhood, the boy, the orphan boy, everything that started with him from the very beginning remained with him till the very end. And that behind that big prophet that we all know, there is really that human boy, that childhood, that orphan, that boy who grew up, that young man who fell in love across this whole story. But that, of course, will be way to go. There's still a long way to get there after the conquest of Mecca. Now we go back to Mecca, where Muhammad is this young man. He's trying to do his life. He's trying to work. He's probably heartbroken for not being able to marry the woman that he loved. He's burning with desire after joining this Hilf al-Fudul, yearning for this justice, and all of these things are stirring in his heart as he was growing up to become a man. The yearning of an orphan boy who was yearning for a mother, who was yearning for the support, for the care, or that young man who wanted to make a life for himself, or that man who realized that his society was so unjust and that there is a better way, to create a pact of justice around him. What will happen to this man with all of these desires and yearnings and burning desires in his heart is what we will see in the next session. Thank you, everybody.